sometimes we'll give money directly to campaigns, but more often we will do the ads for them. So we can't coordinate because it's a PAC.
Early in November, Cenk Uygur put a poll on his Twitter asking who has done more damage to the country, right-wing media or corporate media? This is an interesting question for Cenk to ask, given that he's previously argued that corporate media has a right-wing bias. Now he's essentially conceding that the two are in fact distinct from one another. It's also interesting for Cenk to tweet this, given that the Young Turks is in fact an incorporated media company. In other words, Cenk's own company is in fact, legally speaking, part of the corporate media. Now, it would be fair for Cenk to differentiate the Young Turks from the mainstream media, like CNN or the New York Times, as they are definitely distinct from outlets like those. But it does matter that TYT is an incorporated media company, given how involved they are in electoral politics. As you may remember, last year, Cenk ran for public office. He, of course, lost by a lot. We all had a good laugh and rightly dunked on the man for his paltry performance, despite having over $1 million in his campaign war chest and having so much new media behind him. As I argued at the time, the way he used his own media company to promote his candidacy was very close to a campaign finance violation, and certainly was a violation of the spirit of the law. Of course, I don't really care about breaking those laws, because I think almost all campaign finance laws are ill-conceived and illiberal. But for Cenk Uygur, whose candidacy and media career have revolved around getting money out of politics, which is just another way of saying campaign finance reform, to skirt around the edge of the law like that is at the very least hypocritical. On top of that, the Young Turks are still doing this with their media company and other political organizations they're involved with, and for other candidates for public office, including Nina Turner, who has filed the paperwork to run for Congress in 2020 and is currently on their payroll.
So big picture is Nina and I are going to have conversations where we talk about, well, how do we acquire power as progressives, and then how do we use it? So that's why we've got a segment at the end of this show called What Would Nina Do?
Just in case you didn't watch my video from last year, I'll link it in the description box below. But if you don't feel like watching the whole thing, I'll summarize the relevant portion here. You see, when a media personality, especially one who has ownership stake in a media outlet they work for, runs for public office, there are lots of potential campaign finance hazards they can run into. For example, in 1996, Steve Forbes of Forbes magazine ran for president. The Federal Elections Commission filed a lawsuit against his campaign, alleging that he had violated campaign finance laws because he had continued to write his monthly column for the magazine while running for president. While the relevant laws have changed somewhat since 1996, then and now media corporations are allowed to engage in political speech. This is why the New York Times editorial board is allowed to endorse candidates. What corporations cannot do is donate to campaigns, either directly or in an in-kind way. The FEC defines an in-kind contribution as a non-monetary contribution. Goods or services offered for free or at less than the usual charge result in an in-kind contribution. Similarly, when a person or entity pays for a service on the committee's behalf, the payment is an in-kind contribution, an expenditure made by any person or entity in cooperation, consultation, or concert with, or at the request or suggestion of, a candidate's campaign is also considered an in-kind contribution to the candidate. The last sentence there is what's most relevant here. Media coverage of politics undeniably affects elections, probably more so than paid advertisement. Generally speaking, positive coverage helps a campaign and negative coverage hurts it. Legally speaking, the difference between a media outlet simply covering a campaign or election and making an in-kind contribution is coordination between the two entities. This is where the FEC got Steve Forbes. There's nothing inherently wrong with, say, a print outlet running an editorial from a candidate for public office. This sort of thing happens pretty much every election cycle. The difference here was that because Steve Forbes, the candidate, had ownership stake in the publication that he was writing for during his campaign, coordination between the two entities was deemed inevitable. When candidate Joe Biden wrote an article for USA Today imploring then-President Trump to take COVID-19 seriously, by law, that was just a newspaper running an editorial written by a man who happened to be running for president. When Steve Forbes publishes an editorial in a magazine that he owns, the FEC necessarily considers this coordination because the two cannot be divorced from one another. The FEC considered the columns to be illegal in-kind campaign contributions from a corporation, Forbes magazine, to a campaign, Steve Forbes for president, and charged Forbes with violating campaign finance laws. The argument was that Forbes magazine, by providing Forbes the candidate with an outlet for his ideas, was effectively just advertising for him, and hence providing a service for free to his campaign, which is an in-kind contribution. Usually people have to pay for space in Forbes. Hence, the articles could be valued as advertisements for Forbes the candidate according to their commercial rate. The FEC valued the columns at $94,900. The courts ultimately threw out the FEC's lawsuit on very narrow grounds. Forbes never talked about his candidacy or specifically told people to vote for him in his columns. Cenk isn't nearly as charitable towards media outlets as are the courts. He certainly considers positive media coverage for candidates and potential candidates to be advertisements. Consider how Cenk characterizes the CNN special with Chris Christie.
Now, CNN is promoting this special with Chris Christie, which I kind of find hilarious because this graphic would not persuade me to watch something, but nonetheless.
I mean, look at this giant marketing ad for a Republican politician who's clearly going to run for president.
Being Chris Christie.
Oh, being Chris Christie, what the hell is that? That's not a thing. That's just being a scumbag politician. Imagine if they did being Cenk Uygur for an hour on CNN. Everybody would say that's crazy. He's a progressive. Why would you just advertise him? They're like a corporate Republican politician. They're like, obviously you advertise him for a whole hour. And that is worth millions of dollars, maybe tens of millions of dollars. This is a giant ad for Chris Christie. It's unbelievable.
Why it wasn't an advertisement from the Young Turks when they did a town hall with congressional candidate Nina Turner, I don't know.
The subject of our town hall is someone else you might be familiar with. She was a Cleveland City Councilor. And she was a state senator in Ohio. She was the president of Our Revolution. She was the campaign co-chair of Bernie Sanders' presidential campaign in 2020. And she is the Nina Turner.
So, Cenk got all up in arms about CNN doing a special with Chris Christie, who will probably run for president. Yet, he thinks it's perfectly fine for him to give an entire show to Nina Turner. Cenk gets all hot and bothered about being Chris Christie. Yet, Power Hour with Nina Turner, where they literally animated her as a superhero and asked her what she would do if she was in power, is totally cool. How is Power Hour not just a gigantic advertisement? And again, Chris Christie isn't even officially running for president yet, whereas Nina Turner has actually filed paperwork to run for Congress in 2022. And as Cenk and so many others have stated multiple times, they want Turner in Congress because they think she'll be their champion. How is this not a corporation boosting an aspiring politician? We'll come back to this later. Media companies usually take measures to avoid these sorts of hazards. In 2012, Fox News ended their contracts with Newt Gingrich and Rick Santorum, both of whom were contributors to their network, to avoid any campaign finance violations, as well as other potential conflicts of interest. Of course, Donald Trump, during his presidency and both of his campaigns, almost certainly coordinated with on-air personalities like Sean Hannity. He got away with it because coordination is difficult to prove, and the FEC is very unlikely to file a lawsuit against the sitting president. How did the Young Turks get around these sorts of things? Well, they didn't cover Cenk's campaign on the show, at least not while Cenk was on the panel. In fact, all editorial control over the stories they covered were handed over to Anna Kasparian. If they did choose to talk about the campaign with Cenk, they would bring him on as a guest to his own show to get interviewed by Anna.
Welcome, Anna. Thank you.
I'm welcoming you.
That's right.
He's a guest on this show.
It's totally not an advertisement for his campaign. It's just a media personality interviewing a candidate for public office. They initially said that this was to maintain their integrity.
As I'm running, yes, I'm going to keep my day job, but I cannot, when I'm a host on the program, I can't comment on my district or my race. Not only, look, actually, legally you can, but I don't want to.
And I don't want you to either, because
That's right.
I think it's important for us to, maintain our credibility and to, remain objective when it comes to reporting the facts.
They then later admitted that they did this because they were legally obligated to do so.
Like, this is not like one of those cheesy, like, here with us now is congressional candidate for California's 25th district, Cenk Uygur. Thank you for joining us, Cenk.
Why? Are you saying we did that before?
Yeah, because we had to legally. But anyway.
Yeah.
This is how they got away with using the full resources of the Young Turks Corporation to back a congressional candidate who works for and has ownership stake in that company, and who, we should note, was still fulfilling his duties as CEO of the company. Obviously, marshaling the resources of the Young Turks wasn't enough to win Cenk a special election, but Cenk's race wasn't a one-off. No, this didn't start, nor has it ended with Cenk's failed campaign. In fact, just the other day, they had Morgan Harper on one of their panels. Harper is currently a candidate for the Democratic nomination for Ohio's 2022 Senate race. They not only plugged her campaign, they also encouraged their audience to contribute or volunteer.
Look, Morgan's been on with us a number of times on TYT, but now she's running for Senate in Ohio. And Morgan, it's a super difficult question, but if you were in the Senate, what would you do under these circumstances?
Fight like hell.
Fighter.
So that's why we've got to flip this seat. We have to win it. We have to win it not just by a Democrat, but by a Democrat that's really going to get in there and fight for the people.
So morganharper.org is her website.
It's not just candidates that they do this for, though. There are numerous organizations that Cenk either helped start or is actively involved with. Let's take a look at those organizations. The three political organizations that Cenk helped found were the Justice Democrats, Wolf PAC, and Rebellion PAC. He was very publicly kicked out of the Justice Democrats. He claims to no longer be intimately involved with Wolf PAC, but he still runs Rebellion PAC. What is one of the through lines that these various organizations share? The Justice Democrats is an organization devoted to primarying Democrats in favor of more progressive politicians. While they support a standard leftist agenda, getting money out of politics is their main issue. Wolf PAC is a political action committee Cenk started at Occupy Wall Street, devoted to lobbying state legislatures. They want the state legislatures to pass a resolution calling for a constitutional convention, wherein delegates would ratify an amendment abolishing the private financing of elections. The actual text of the amendment has been taken off their website, but luckily our buddy Sean did some digging and found it a few years ago.
If you can't tell, I do in fact have the text to the constitutional amendment that Cenk Uygur, Wolfpack, and the Young Turks are proposing to add to our constitution. And it reads as follows. Corporations are not people. They have none of the constitutional rights of human beings. Corporations are not allowed to give money to any politician, directly or indirectly. No politician can raise over $100 from any person or entity. All elections must be publicly financed. Yes, this is the text of the amendment that Wolfpack decided to go with, and were so embarrassed by that they actually had to pull off their website.
As I'm editing this video, I can't help but point out how funny it is that Sean made Cenk sound like the Cookie Monster. Anyways, what about Rebellion PAC? The one that Cenk is still involved with. Rebellion PAC claims to be a clean hybrid PAC. A hybrid PAC is a political action committee that may contribute to campaigns directly and can also do unlimited, independent expenditures on campaigns. They just have to keep the funds segregated. This is something that Cenk Uygur has previously conflated with bribery.
I mean, that's literally what we're doing. We're giving money to politicians. That used to be called a bribe. And now instead, but like if you're a person, you have a cap, you can only do 5,400, including the primaries, etc. But if you want to do independent expenditures, there's no limits.
Why it's not bribery when he does it, I do not know. And here's where things get interesting. What does Rebellion PAC mean when it claims to be clean? Well, unlike hybrid, which is an actual classification from the FEC, clean is a purely subjective term. According to Rebellion PAC's website, the PAC focuses on fundraising from small donors, does not take money from organizations that are antithetical to progressive goals, and does not accept money from for-profit corporations. So how does Cenk manage his involvement with these various political organizations while also hosting the Young Turks? Whenever Cenk brings these political organizations up on the show, he claims to be acting independently of his role on the show and his role as CEO of the Young Turks Corporation.
And I'm acting as a person here, not as the guy who runs the company or anything along those lines.
As the Young Turks have stated many times, their company does not make endorsements or involve itself in races.
All right, and I would like to end by saying that TYT as a company does not do a company-wide endorsement. We have a team of reporters who will remain objective. And when it comes to hosts who share opinion, they are free to share their endorsements of various candidates, including candidates like Cenk Uygur.
What they usually fail to mention is that, as was the case with Cenk's race, they do this in an effort to avoid coordination. Unlike campaigns for public office, certain types of PACs can take donations from corporations, sometimes without limit. The standard for in-kind contributions are the same as they are for campaigns, in that coordination with a media outlet is the difference between a media outlet covering the organization versus advertising for it. Again, this is legal in the case of PACs, but if they exceed a certain dollar amount, they do have to disclose it with the FEC. So has there been coordination, and hence corporate donations, between the for-profit business, the Young Turks Incorporated, and the supposedly clean Rebellion PAC? Well, numerous times, the Young Turks have shown Rebellion PAC ads on their channel and allowed Cenk to solicit donations for his organization.
So if you want to help put this ad on air more and more, go to helptherebellion.com. We've already raised some money. We want to raise more and more to put this and other ads on helptherebellion.com.
We can laugh and make cheap points all we want about how the Young Turks are declining in relevance. But make no mistake, people actually do pay for airspace with this company. The Young Turks make money from advertising through conduits like Google, via ads on their YouTube videos, and directly from advertising, by reading ad spots on their podcasts and such. YouTube ads are literally something Rebellion PAC has purchased. If you look at the forms they filed with the FEC, you'll see multiple payments to Google for digital ad space. So by running these ads on their YouTube channel, the Young Turks Corporation is giving something to Rebellion PAC that they would otherwise have to pay for, which again is perfectly legal, though it has to be disclosed to the FEC, and would be a violation of Rebellion PAC's claim to only take clean money, which is not illegal, but is certainly dishonest. I suspect the people at TYT would defend themselves by saying that they're a news organization merely covering something that is newsworthy. They've also covered ads from the Lincoln Project and other organizations. How is this any different? Well, the difference is that Cenk doesn't run any of those other organizations, whereas he does run Rebellion PAC. Cenk ran all these political action committees and the Young Turks Corporation simultaneously.
I would have Saturdays packed with phone calls. I got to call Wolfpack, I got to call Just Democrats, I got to call this politician, I got to call this business person, et cetera, right?
They're all pillars of Cenk's master plan for a progressive takeover of America.
And once we do these 5 things, they don't know it, but 5 years from now, their heart's going to explode. And we're going to win the elections, and we're going to have the country. Okay, again, guys, just a metaphor. So let me show you the 5 things on the list, and then we'll talk it through, and I'll tell you why I put those things. So number 1 is TYT. Why? That's a placeholder for media. These are all placeholders. These are, right now, what I think is the best we got. But if others come in and do a better job, fantastic, okay? TYT in the media, for grassroots, it's our revolution. For congressional elections, it's Justice Democrats. Oh, there's surprise number 1. Number 4 is Cenk PAC. What in the world is that? We'll explain that in a second. And number 5 is Wolfpack.
Cenk PAC, at the time, was Cenk for Congress. He has since rolled over the funds and changed the name to Rebellion PAC. Seriously though, how is this not a coordinated effort? Everyone who is critical of campaign finance laws, both those who are for them and against them, like me, know that the legal safeguard preventing coordination between candidates, donors, and political action committees is a farce. Back in 2012, when Stephen Colbert was still funny, he had a brief gag run for president in the Republican primary in South Carolina. Colbert already had a super PAC named Americans for a Better Tomorrow, which he handed control over to Jon Stewart after starting his fake run. They renamed the PAC the Definitely Not Coordinating with Stephen Colbert Super PAC. The way that these two would get around coordination is that Stephen Colbert would just say what he wanted the PAC to do publicly. For example, Colbert put his head inside a cardboard TV set and said, "Nation, I am calling on the Super PAC not to run vicious character assassination ads that impugn and borderline slander any candidate. If in any way those ads can be traced back to me." The PAC went on to run ads in South Carolina painting Mitt Romney as a serial killer. Since Colbert didn't address Stewart specifically, it wasn't coordination, even though Stewart heard what Colbert said and complied. Since Colbert had actually filed the paperwork to run for president in South Carolina, legally speaking, he was a real candidate. And legally speaking, the PAC was also real. Since Colbert didn't address Stewart specifically, though, the two entities did not coordinate. even though Stewart heard what Colbert said and complied. And it was all legal. The point of this exercise was to expose what a joke the laws against coordination are. Colbert later won a Peabody Award for this satire. So has Cenk technically, in the legal sense, coordinated his media company's coverage with the activities of these PACs? That's hard to say. What we do know is that entities can go to absurd lengths to get around the law, even though, in every practical sense, they're still collaborating for the purpose of achieving the same goal. This is one of the big reasons I'm opposed to campaign finance laws. They largely don't prevent what they're supposed to. All they really do is burden campaigns with lots of paperwork and legal fees. What I also know is that Cenk does not tolerate this sort of behavior from other people. He himself has pointed out that the safeguards against coordination are absurd, and he demonstrates their absurdity with his actions. Even if he's technically not breaking campaign finance laws, the shell game he's engaged in demonstrates his enormous hypocrisy. If someone else did this, Cenk would not tolerate it.
Of course!